this. I think the key thing, and we see this a lot at general meetings, is we're standing up at the general meeting educating the ownership on what they're about to vote on. And in my mind, that's too late. Really what you need to do is you need to educate the ownership ahead of time. And you need to make sure everybody has the same base understanding about what a short-term rental is, how much is in the building, how it affects people in the building. They really need to have the pros and cons explained to them. We think an info session is a great idea to do that. So really all you do is you put up a couple notices in the building and say, we're going to have a general discussion. It's not going to be minute or anything. We're just going to have a general discussion on short-term rentals in our building. And you see who shows up, you can answer some questions, and you can get everybody on a baseline, because those people that show up are the people that are going to be vocal at the AGM. Those are the people that are committed and compassionate about it, or passionate about it. And so you want to have something where you can educate all the owners, because we know the owners don't always read the minutes, right? Heck, we don't even read the minutes all the time, okay? So it's important that you want to educate the owners first. And then the next thing is you want to get inputs from owners on what they want. So we've got one strata corporation in Vancouver, and they've tried 3 times for the same bylaw, and it's failed all 3 times. And they say, oh, that one owner with all those proxies always fails it. Yeah, he's an owner. So if he doesn't want it, we got to work with them. We got to educate them. We got to find out what that solution is. Maybe that owner's going to be okay with short-term rentals that say you have to rent 3 months or more or something, or there's got to be that middle ground. And it's really important that you consult with the owners. A tactic that's bound to fail is, and you're rolling the dice, is if you just show up at the AGM and you say, hey, this is the bylaw we're going to put forward. You haven't consulted with the owners to see if they really want it, and you haven't educated them on why it's important to them. So really it's important that you, when you work with this new legislation, that you're really taking the owner's perspective in, and not just your own or not just council. We know in buildings with large investors, usually the council's all owners and they live there. Well, maybe 51% of the building is investors and they don't live there and they're not on council, but they're going to vote against you. And so you really got to make sure that you try to engage them in any way you can. So what should be in your bylaws? You've talked to the owners, you've educated them, everybody's on the same baseline, you've heard from them, and they say, yeah, we don't want any short-term rentals in our building because it's a safety issue and because we worry about the wear and tear. Okay, so what are we going to ban first of all? And Veronica, do you want to explain the different ins and outs of all the different kinds that you can ban?
Yeah, so in the slide we talk about different kinds of activities. If you see in the legislation slide where we talked about the regulations and the changes there, they actually don't use the term short-term rental. They talk about vacation accommodation, temporary accommodation. And so really what you're looking at is, what is it that you're wanting to stop? Are you a community that just wants to stop the nightly rentals, but you're okay with anything that's sort of longer term than that? So are you just targeting vacation rentals? Are you okay with corporate housing, or do you not want corporate housing? Are you okay with the temporary accommodations, like the accommodations where you've got an operator who provides services to insurance companies to allow people who have insurance claims while their homes are being rebuilt to live there in temporary housing accommodation? So is that what you're trying to ban? Some strata corporations don't want short-term rentals, but they're okay with house swaps. That's where, you know, I go on vacation to France and a matching person with me will come and use my space from France, like they're a person in France whose space I'm going to be living at for 2 months, for example. They come and they live in my home for 2 months. And so some strata corporations are okay with that, but not okay with other kinds of vacation rentals. Is it a home exchange? Is it student housing where you allow students to live temporarily with you? So what is it that you're actually trying to accomplish and to stop and to prevent? And I think a lot of times there's this big rush into thinking, oh, we want to ban short-term rentals without really knowing the extent of what they want to ban and sort of what they want to consider. In some cases, and I've had that with some strata corporations where particularly I find it with the downtown core strata corporations where you've got a lot of tourism happening, where strata corporations don't want to ban it entirely and are happy with the City of Vancouver's regime, or know that that's all they're going to be able to pass in terms of bylaws. And so they want to mirror the City of Vancouver's regime to be able to do enforcement alongside with the whatever gets reported to the City of Vancouver. So you really have to think about, are you banning it? Are you just restricting it? Are you mirroring the City of of Vancouver's bylaws? And if you're not in the City of Vancouver, what does your municipality have to say about short-term rentals in that municipality? So we really have to think about what it is that you're trying to accomplish. And like you say, with respect to any other kind of bylaws that you're crafting, you really have to know what the owners want. A council of 7 might think in one particular way, but until they engage the ownership, they may find out when they go to that meeting that nobody else thinks that way, or very few people do.
Yeah, I saw a really interesting bylaw a month ago, and it was the City of Vancouver's bylaws, and then they had just tweaked it and added a couple extra steps on it. That council may have not engaged the ownership and the bylaw failed, but it was a neat bylaw. I thought it was a really good way of doing it, is to take what the City of Vancouver's got and just add a couple extra layers onto it so that you could better understand who's in the building. Okay, so the Strata Council and the Strata Manager and everybody and the owners have talked. They've decided they want to put a new bylaw in. It's going to be customized to what they want. They probably involve a lawyer to have it written. It gets to an AGM. The owners approve of it. They understand. You get it. So what do you do now? So I want to make a key point that fining is not the answer to stopping short-term rentals. All you do is drive them underground. And you can really see the way the City of Vancouver has addressed it is they said instead of the Berlin model, I think you said, where you just try to oppress it there, really what you're doing is you're trying to be effective. And that's what all the strata councils need to understand. When you get that bylaw passed, that's great. Sending $1,000 fines like bombs all over the place is just going to drive everybody underground. So what you need to do is we need to effectively work with those people that have Airbnbs and educate them that A, if you didn't go to the AGM, you can't do this anymore, or yes, you can do it, but only under these circumstances, because the goal of changing the bylaw isn't to issue fines. The goal of the bylaw is to shape behavior. And so we really need to think about not fine first, but how do we shape the behavior? It's really interesting when you look at Toronto and our offices there, they're really limited in how they can fine. In some states, you can't fine. So someone breaks a bylaw, you can't fine them, which is like, well, that's like so foreign to us here, right? But you can go to court and compel them to do things, and it's much easier and streamlined. But here, it's we kind of sometimes fine first instead of thinking, what is our desired result and how do we get there? So we really want to know how we're going to change behavior. I think getting creative is a great idea, and look at different approaches. But whatever you do, we find it's most effective if you're consistent. So if you can't stand that people don't wait for the parkade gate to fine, and then you issue 20 fines, and you put up notices, and then you don't do anything for the next 8 months, you're not really going to shape that behavior. If you're consistent in what you do over and over, repetition, that's where we mold behavior, and we see the most effective application of a bylaw. So, and I'm going to get you to speak to this in Veronica in a second. It's not that you have somebody, your concierge, sitting there watching everybody come in. Really the way bylaws are meant to be enforced is that you have someone complain about something. So if you don't want to create like a prison-like atmosphere where someone comes home and they're worried that they're chewing gum and it might be against the bylaws, right? Well, it's someone's home, but then you also have to have them comply with the bylaws. So Veronica, you
any owner or any tenant for that matter can say, well, I've noticed that I think there is an Airbnb being operated in the unit next door. Well, that's great. That's fine. But really what you want to know is why they think an Airbnb is being operated. Like, what is it that's making them reach that conclusion? Because it's going to be very difficult for you to enforce the fines or enforce the bylaws based on somebody saying that they think that there is an Airbnb operated. Perhaps they think that because they keep on seeing strange people show up with suitcases at different nights. That is a far more compelling evidence in that there is a short-term rental, particularly if they can actually state dates and times when that has happened. So really what you want is details. Why is it that people think this is happening? What evidence do they have in their observations that they have observed that this is actually a commercial operation rather than somebody's just residence?
Yeah, so we have One Strata Corporation downtown. They definitely have a short-term rental problem, and I can say problem because the ownership wants one thing, and they voted that, but they still have a lot of people doing short-term rentals in their building. And so what they've done is they've got a council member that's dedicated to, they have a committee, so they got some people that are really keen on enforcing it, and then they have a special Airbnb email address, and then they post it. So if you see someone roll in with suitcases, you can report it to this email address, and then that committee will take it up. They'll search the different websites to try to find the link, and then they'll help with the enforcement of it. And usually that might be a warning letter saying, hey, we noticed that there's different people showing up with suitcases on these days. And just like Veronica said, you want to have some specifics, not just that guy's got short-term rental. You want to say, I've noticed that different people come into the unit on this day at this time, and they had different bags, and that really makes your enforcement of your bylaw a lot easier. And that's one approach that they've taken, and that's, again, being creative. And how do you address this? It's not a one-size-fits-all solution, but you can do different things. You can have, we have one concierge, and then I'll go to the next slide. When they see someone with bags, they say, oh, are you checking in? Right? And then, oh, I am. I'm checking into my Airbnb. Oh, that's great. What unit are you checking into? You know? So there's different ways of being creative and doing it in a friendly atmosphere, right?
And back to the point that Catherine made about partnering, that too should, I think, be, or you should consider as part of your strategy, right? Is the Strata Corporation's going to enforce its bylaws, but where there is a contravention of also the municipal bylaws, of the City of Vancouver bylaws, for example, report it. Because it's going to have sort of multi-people targeting this short-term rental is much easier than each of you acting in isolation.
Yeah, you got it. So I'm going to run through the list here. Monitor for infractions effectively. We just talked about that. Council and owners, who to call. So who should, if we think it's in the City of Vancouver, what number should they call? We need to educate those owners. On-site associates, what are they to do? And I'm going to talk about that in a second. And then the strata manager, what steps need to be taken? So is there going to be a blanket thing where we send out a warning letter on the first infraction, and then the second one we send a stronger worded letter, and then the council reviews for fines? We need to set that process up for what each strata corporation wants. So our front desk. So a lot of times we have that front desk, and I joked about, you know, are you checking in? But that's actually an effective way of doing it. But really their job isn't to be the bylaw enforcement for short-term rentals, because you're going to turn them into from a community builder into the police, which is not the goal of the thing. Collect reports on alleged bylaws. They can engage unfamiliar residents. They can search short-term rental sites if you want to ask them, you know, you've got a graveyard concierge and he's got nothing to do from 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. You can task him with something like that. And then they can also assist and I think this is key in the education of the owners. So if they come into the building and someone's like, oh, I'm going to list my building on short-term rentals, that concierge or front desk has an opportunity to educate the owners. Oh, have you seen this bylaw? And here's a sheet maybe that the council's written up on what you can and cannot do. You can book a rental for 90 days, but you can't book a rental for 9 days. And so you can have your front desk engage the ownership that way.